Welcome everyone to today's panel discussion. Come right on in. My name is Shelley Naseem, by the way, and I am the CEO of Center for Executive Excellence, and we are thrilled that you are joining us today for this fascinating panel discussion. You're among, I just heard about 175 total registrants from around the globe for this quarterly panel discussion. And it is here where we invite you to come in as you are today and to acknowledge and express gratitude, first of all, for the indigenous peoples who carried this land for a millennia and still in the present and in the future. Our organization is headquartered in what's now known as San Diego on the traditional lands of the Kumeyaay Nation, translated as the people who overlook the ocean from the cliffs. We are committed to continuing to learn the stories of this land and to support its caretakers. If there are indigenous people with us today, please share your tribe so that we may recognize you. We've also will be sharing a place of native land, a place that you can search your own location. So as we gather, I'd love to hear from you in the chat. These chat boxes are usually banging when we do these quarterly panel discussions. So I fully expect that to happen again today. So come in. We treat these events as community builders. So feel free to use that tool that Danielle is sharing that we're dropping in the chat to share the lands that you inhabit. Also, please feel free to share your LinkedIn profile if you like. Let us know what organization you're with, or if you're between roles, that's just fine too. As you're doing that, I want to go over some housekeeping to help you have the very best experience possible. First, we encourage you to edit your name and add your pronouns if you like. Just click on those three dots in your Zoom box. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, by the way. Also, you can click on the up arrow next to the closed caption if we've managed to get the closed captions and subtitles working. That's why we had a little bit of technology hiccup. So sometimes these we our takeoffs are super nice and clear, and sometimes we hit a few turbulence on the way. Either way, we're going to have fun today. Let's see, we've reserved, I just want you to know, about 25 minutes at the end of the panel discussion to take your questions of the panel. So please put your questions for the panel in the Q&A box so that everyone will have the ability to upvote on those questions on what they would most like the panel to address. Also, our team will be dropping hyperlinks to supplemental information in the chat, and we encourage you to do the same. Help us all to continue to build awareness. We'll share both a recording of this panel discussion and a transcript from that chat with you as soon as we can turn that around. And if you're interested in earning DEI credentials, getting access to our microlearning platform, or signing up for our quarterly DEI panel discussions like this, they're always free. So my colleague Danielle will tell you all about that at the end of the session. Okay, let's move into the panel introductions. And it is my honor to introduce this esteemed group of DEI practitioners who have graciously shared with us today and share their time and experience with this community. They represent a really wide variety of untapped talent, and I'm so excited to hear their story. So first of all, my friend and mentor, Casey Tonnelly, is our moderator. Casey has established a reputation as an innovative and passionate leadership development coach, anti-racism educator, and diversity, equity, and inclusion strategist. Casey has been delivering attentive and dedicated program management for over 15 years, sustaining and guiding community initiatives, striving to support diverse and underserved populations. At Center for Executive Excellence, Casey is also our lead facilitator for our DEI Executive Certificate Program. Welcome, Casey.
Sorry, Sherry.
That's cool. Among our esteemed panelists today also is Arthur Benjamin, the Senior Global Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Tinuiti, the largest independent performance marketing firm across Google, Facebook, and Amazon. Arthur is an experienced talent acquisition, diversity, and inclusion leader with 2 decades of demonstrated history in strategic thought leadership and planning around the complexities of talent engagement, culture, diversity, and inclusion. Hello, my friend Art. Next, we have Rachel Kjack, who is the head of DEI consulting and training for Translator, Inc., and holds an MA in organizational development. She spent the past 25 years working with organizations ranging from fast growth startups to Google. Rachel specializes in developing people-centric technology platforms and tools to support culture change and has rolled these out to global organizations to create empathy, connection, and awareness at scale. She's authored over 80 courses on topics including equity and inclusion, social and emotional intelligence, purpose-driven leadership, as well as changing the stigma around hiring formerly incarcerated people. Rachel is also an executive producer for Unincarcerated Productions. I highly recommend this podcast with actually multiple media projects about formerly incarcerated, as well as being a passionate advocate for prison reform and reentry work. We're so happy to have you with us today, Rachel.
Thank you, Sherry.
And next is Jessica Lee. Jessica is the executive director and co-founder of NeuroTalent Works, a nonprofit organization advancing neurodiversity inclusion, diversity of minds in the workplace, and connecting employers to neurodivergent talent or individuals with cognitive distinctions such as autism. Prior to starting NeuroTalent Works, Jessica was a management consultant with global IT firm Capgemini, and a program manager with the nation's largest gas utility, SoCalGas, California, and an executive certificate in social impact strategy at the University of Pennsylvania. It's such a pleasure to have you join us today, Jessica.
Thank you. Likewise.
Thank you. I look forward to having lunch with you soon.
Yeah.
And Rachel Arlene Redeye Porter is the co-founder of Kneading, that's Knea, Kneading Change, a narrative change company that offers anti-oppressive coaching, consulting, and facilitation to justice-seeking individuals, businesses, and organizations. As an unenrolled, mixed-race woman of Seneca and European ancestry, Rachel draws on her lived experience to catalyze discussion about reclaiming wholeness, embracing multitudes, and embodying social justice values. Rachel holds a Master's of Law and Diplomacy from the Fletcher School at Tufts University with a focus on gender analysis. She's also pursuing an MFA in Creative Nonfiction at the Institute of American Indian Arts. So cool. Welcome into the circle, Rachel. And Shelley Winner is a formerly incarcerated restorative justice activist who advocates for justice by educating the public on the benefits of people with criminal records, of hiring people with criminal records. 76% of people released from prison will re-offend and return to prison, which is known as recidivism. Shelley is working to turn the tide on this statistic. She believes that someone must challenge the societal stigma that prevents companies from hiring people with criminal records, and Shelley has taken up that mantle. Shelley Winner, a service specialist at Microsoft, is very active in the restorative justice movement in San Francisco. She's given a TEDx talk, which I've also seen is amazing, on hiring the formerly incarcerated, and was featured in a PBS special called Life After Lockup. Welcome, Shelley. Welcome to you all. And now I am very happy to turn the platform over to you, Casey.
I really appreciate the specificity, Sherry. Clearly, I was just too eager to get in here. I just want to say welcome to everybody. This is so exciting. I love seeing in the chat that, like everyone being like, wow, what an amazing, exciting panel. The individual and collective brilliance that is before us today is pretty dynamic. And I think that's one of the things that's so exciting about DEI work, is that it is alive, it is evolving, it is expansive, it is interconnected. And today is going to be a little bit of a sampling of kind of how that looks. And so I just want to get started by saying thank you to everybody for being here today. And whatever your state of being, whether today's been a hard one, a good one, this is all collective space, so we'll hold it together. And I just invite you to take care of your body and your needs during this time. And like you always do, keep that chat alive and on fire like you always do. So let's just jump right in. First question is, a lot of companies are committed to DEI on their website, but internally there's huge gaps. How are companies missing the mark when it comes to hiring and retaining minoritized talent? And what ideas do you have for how that gap can get bridged? Let's start with Jessica Lee.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here today. It's so nice to be together with, it's like coming back to your tribe, others who are really committed to this work. And yeah, our work and what I'm specifically talking about today is individuals who are neurodivergent and neurodivergent talent. And so just to clarify some terms up front, where neurodiversity is a term that's normally used for groups of people or like this movement towards a diversity of minds in the workplace, you'll hear me saying neurodivergent individuals, which is more for individuals. And these are those that have any type of developmental or cognitive distinctions, such as autism, dyslexia, any type of traumatic brain injury, or information processing differences. And to your question about missing the mark with companies, I would say that neurodiversity is still very much kind of like a new kid on the block, still trying to push for a seat at the table in DEI conversations. And yet I really, our group really believes that neurodiversity and the intention that it takes to be inclusive to our community is actually better for everybody. It really creates equity for all. And so just to give a little more context to that, in the United States, 1 in 6 individuals are neurodivergent. That's a very high number. And autism is the greatest population among that, which is 1 in 44 in the US. When we started this organization 5 years ago, it was 1 in 89. So the prevalence has increased for multiple reasons, mostly earlier diagnoses that are happening in children. But what happens is there are a lot of services for children in the US during schooling years, but upon graduating high school or college, they drop off the service cliff, and it's an 80% unemployment rate. It's exceptionally high, and it's a 50% underemployment rate. So I'm meeting candidates with bachelor's degrees, master's degrees that are working at a grocery store or not working at all. And we know that there's so much talent to be capitalized on. There's so many things to say, but the last thing I'll say about neurodiversity is that it's different and requires a lot of intentionality to do it right. Where a lot of DEI initiatives have focused on more apparent diversity, such as gender and race, neurodiversity is not apparent. And so this adds a little more challenge, but also it requires thoughtful and intentional practices that I'll share about a little later of how you can really tap into this talent. With developmental differences and distinctions also comes some really unique gifts, and there's so much to be capitalized on there. So that's what I'll say about neurodiversity, and a lot more to share. And please ask questions if there are any in the Q&A too.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I love getting to add in the various dimensions of diversity. And also to your point, like as if people who are not across the gender spectrum or across racial lines aren't also experiencing don't have neurodiversity within them. Right.
Totally.
And so I think there's always this piece of like, it's not this dimension or that dimension or this category. It's really about kind of looking at how all of these things are interconnected, intersected, and how are we rooting and focusing on folks who are almost suffering the most from the various identities that are intersecting and that they're struggling through. So I really appreciate you bringing that in here. Now I want to turn it to Art.
Thanks, Casey. I would love to piggyback off of, Casey, what you said and what Jessica talked about a little bit, as I want to talk about the veteran community and really how the corporate culture is really missing an opportunity to really impact the veteran community with work after serving their country. And, you know, as someone who is a veteran myself, someone who is very passionate, of course, I'm a person of color, but I'm also a veteran, and seeing the missed opportunities that we have for the veteran community, supporting you know, veteran spouses, you know, how do we really create opportunities in hiring, creating opportunities? You know, we have incredible individuals who serve their country, who get out and are struggling to find work, are struggling to have assimilation. And some of the best organizations that are doing this right when it comes to veteran talent, they're actually creating transition programs within their organization where they're hiring into veterans fresh out of the military, fresh out of service. And then they're giving them or putting them through a 1 month, 30-day transition within their organization. And they're allowing those veterans to really get a chance to feel like they are included and acclimated into the corporate culture. And I think for me, I think one of the things that I love about what Jessica said is that a lot of our service men and women also come up with things like anxiety or PTSD or things like that, that corporate culture has not learned how to support or has been even afraid to have the conversation around. And so I think there's such an incredible opportunity for us to continue to build programs. I would love to see every D&I program have a military transition program as a part of that, as a part of supporting our veterans, our servicemen and women, and creating opportunities to support spouses as well. And so I think for me, that's something I feel like is a missed opportunity. It's a missed opportunity in hiring, but the organizations that are doing it well and creating true inclusion, true connection are the ones that are very intentional about building that connection with the military and their families. Not to mention, the military is a very diverse community. And so if you're an organization who's looking, again, to increase your representation in your hiring, the military community is a concentrated community of diverse talent, even within itself. So I'll stop there. I know we have other people that want to share, but I think the military community is something that definitely is a missed opportunity for us in corporate culture.
Art, you mentioned that there's a couple, you know, there are some spaces that are directly connected with the military and kind of like creating these pathways for success as like folks are entering the workforce. Do you have any examples of places that are kind of doing exactly what you're talking about?
I can give you examples. I'm usually careful not to say someone's doing it right. But I will say that there are organizations that are making very significant effort in bridging that gap. And I think that's worth noting and worth calling out. And I think if you look at organizations like HP, Leslie Stanton, amazing organization. Her D&I work is absolutely incredible. They have a military support group. Many organizations will create a veteran ERG, which is a great place to start. If you don't have a robust recruiting program, the veteran ERG is a great place to start. But I think HP is a great organization that's really, moving the needle in this space. I also think there's an organization that is starting out in this space that's doing it right, that I've gotten a chance to have some great conversations with. It's called Varian. It's actually Varian Medical Systems. They are starting a great program around military recruitment, and they are actually connecting to the military bases and actually recruiting directly, which I think are absolutely incredible ways for us to bridge that gap and to see some progress made in that space.
Awesome. Thank you, Art. I just put you on the spot there too, so I really appreciate you leaning into that. Also, I'd like to hear from Rachel Kjack, kind of your experience with this question as well.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. And I love what Art and Jessica were talking about. I want to to this a little bit more broadly, I do a lot of work across the board in DEI with all different dimensions of diversity, with a special love and care for formerly incarcerated returning citizens. But when I think about kind of holistically what some of the issues are, there's two things that I think really drive the point home that other folks were already making. One is this issue of performative DEI. It's like, when George Floyd was murdered and employees were asking, or crying out to their companies to like do something. There was a lot of like, hey, let's talk to our communications people. Let's get something written up. Let's make sure we get it out there. And then it kind of stopped, right? And so there's been a lot of stuff that's been driven organically by employees, but it hasn't. The full investment hasn't really been there. It's sort of stopped short of what's I think going to be really more effective. And I think your employer brand is what you do, not what you say. And so while it's important to have a good website and your values and tenets that you believe in are displayed, that's important. But I think that this really, if we look at formerly incarcerated people in particular, if we look at that as a dimension of diversity, and someone goes to apply for a job and they get turned down before they even make it very far, because if your state doesn't have a ban in the box or they find out you have a record, it's like, boom, you're done. And so are we really being inclusive if we're not seeing that as a dimension of diversity? Now, obviously, there's a lot of nuance there. There's some things to be considered. But the other thing I wanted to mention is, and this was kind of said in different ways, if you optimize for a specific dimension of diversity, whether it's for veterans, whether it's for neurodivergent folks, people with mental health issues, other, formerly incarcerated, you're actually optimizing it for everyone, because you're thinking through those things that, that actually are an issue for a lot of different groups of people, right? The other thing I wanted to mention too, along the lines of, what we say and what we do being different, is we talk about creating psychologically safe spaces. And then we do a lot of things that contradict that in our organizations. And I think, just in terms of the way corporate America tends to work, there's a lot of like, okay, we are about these values, we espouse these things, we expect our employees to live up to that. But if behaviorally, we haven't actually, whether it's training or whether it's getting people into connection with each other through different types of focus groups or events or those kinds of things, our behavior doesn't change, right? When we're in relationship with people, that's what causes change, whether it's in a learning experience or, actually, I would advocate that everything's a learning experience. There's one company that I wanted to mention that's doing this really well, specifically for their employee resource groups, and that's Expedia Group. So Expedia, if you don't know this, they probably own pretty much every travel brand with a couple of exceptions. So they have about 30 different companies. And when they brought them all together under one umbrella a few years ago, they had to figure out how to bring all their ERGs together, because one organization would call it the veterans ERG, and another group would have different ERGs, right? So they were merging all those together, and they did a lot of really amazing work specifically around the disability community, mental health, learning differences, and they actually utilized the employees that they have to figure out how to optimize what kind of events, what kind of communications campaigns to really help people understand, like, these are some of the things that we do well. And they created whole travel packages, I guess, for lack of a better thing to call it, that allowed LGBTQ folks or people who had a PTSD or a traumatic brain injury. They specifically created travel packages for those demographics, and so they utilize their employees to figure out what's the right answer. Like, how do we really show up in a way that we're walking the talk? So I would just say that thinking about performative DEI, thinking about really creating psychologically safe spaces, that is going to, pay off dividends in terms of who's attracted to work for your company. So
I love that, Rachel, because you're also bringing up this point of how it's one thing to start recruiting. It's another thing to start being an environment that's actually supportive to the person, as well as there's so much untapped talent within organizations because of the things that people armor up about or feel like they have to keep invisible. We have
just better than I did. I love it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, because we start with the hiring process, right? We think that's where we need to start. But if we don't have a culture where people want to work, right, then the numbers aren't going to, you're not going to have that sticking power with folks. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Love that. We have a little bit more time. If anybody, Shelley or Rachel Porter, if you wanted to chime in with some thoughts, love to hear them. And if not, you're coming up next anyway. So
happy to jump in. Yeah. Just a note too, I think that there is a balance, what Rachel was saying with the outward focused communication strategy. Oftentimes it does feel very performative, but I also think it's a really great entry point for companies to start having the conversation. And it's also a signal to prospective employees that you at least know this is something you should be talking about. Like justice is something that we know we should mention. And so even when it is performative, you can distinguish them from the many, many companies who haven't even taken that step. And that is unfortunately the reality. And so sometimes when you look at different company websites or how companies are presenting themselves from a communications, or what I like to say, a narrative change standpoint, which is communications with a social justice lens, you can see the level to which companies have thought it out by the degree to which their performative, action is nuanced. So are they talking about pronouns? Are they talking about land acknowledgements? These are just kind of very basic gateway things. But if they've said, hey, we actually know those words, and you're like, maybe there's a point where we can have a deeper conversation about whether this workplace is right for me, or whether it's a place that's ready to shift in really exciting and innovative ways. So I'll just add that.
Beautiful. I love the additional texture that each of you gets to build off from each other. It's really, really beautiful. Let's just jump into the next one, which I'm so excited for. What are the primary systemic barriers, physical or cultural, that need to be addressed in your organization, what you've seen, or societally, to continue making improvements to a more equitable and diverse workforce that thrives? I'm going to add that thriving part there. And that represents like various folks that maybe a lot of folks are not thinking about, which you all can speak to really well. So first, I wanna invite Shelley to share a little bit.
Hi, thanks for allowing me the chance to answer this question. I love this question. I think that the primary systemic barriers that do need to be addressed societally are the fact that most companies don't hire formerly incarcerated. So over 50% of companies just will not do it. Microsoft used to be one of them until I came along, but many companies talk about being diverse and inclusive, but like I said, when you ask them how many formerly incarcerated do you hire, they say none. So how can you be diverse and inclusive if you support discriminatory practices? There's 70 million people in America that have a criminal record. So that equates to about a third of our population. And at the end of the day, we're all humans, right? We all make mistakes. And what if you were only known for the worst thing that you'd ever done for the rest of your life? And that worst thing completely was oppressive when trying to find work, when trying to find a place to live, even, attending school. And some schools won't even let you get certain grants or loans because of it. People have paid their debt to society, and, people who have paid their debt and have rehabilitated themselves, they should be given another chance. By not doing this, we are hurting our communities, because who do you think pays for, these people's incarceration? It actually costs more to incarcerate one person for 1 year than it does to send them to Harvard. Yeah, that's crazy, right? And the problem with our punishment system is that it's based off retribution and not rehabilitation. So we don't even get to the root of what is causing this incarceration. We just focus on, well, you did something wrong, you need to be punished. But how about trying to figure out a way to help, fix whatever it is that's causing them to become incarcerated, that's sending them to jails and prisons and causing them to live this life, That was one of the things that I struggled with. I grew up in an environment where my father was an addict, in and out of prison most of my life. And so I grew up on that same path. 76% of children follow in their parents' footsteps. So if you have parents that are, running and gunning, I say, yeah, I call it, the children are most likely to grow up doing the same thing. But what I think that companies should do is to really step up and take some responsibility, because they need to help our communities. And by them not giving second chances actually hurts our communities. And they should be, some of the things that I think they should do is, change their antiquated hiring practices and policies. A lot of these practices and policies have been in place since the conception of the company. And, no one's ever looked at it from a different perspective. And so they just think people with a criminal record are bad and they don't deserve to work. Well, that's not the case anymore. And people are people, and we all make mistakes. So I think that they need to, train their HR and their recruiters how to properly scout and hire justice impacted folks. I know Rachel does a lot of work with companies and has actually created an excellent training course. It's I think, what is it, 6 or 8 hour training course, Rachel? Yeah, it's an all-day training course where you get to, the employees actually get to be formally incarcerated for a day, and they have all these tasks that they need to get done, and it's incredible. So I think companies should start, thinking about doing these types of trainings. And there are a lot of successful companies right now that hire formerly incarcerated, and they are just doing amazing, like Dave's Killer Bread. It's one of the most successful bread companies in the world. And I think 30% of his workforce is formerly incarcerated. Checker is another incredible, it's a background check company. They have an initiative where they are set to hire 7% or more of their workforce has to be formerly incarcerated. So, yeah, they are truly creating an inclusive and diverse environment. And then there's, there's a ton of companies. I could go on and on, but even our own government has made a pledge to hire, formerly incarcerated. So I look at it like this: if our government's willing to hire formerly incarcerated, then there's no excuse for anyone not to hire formerly incarcerated.
Oh, Shelley, I feel like you connected so many amazing dots in your story, right? Like just sharing so many things about like the invisible of like what's happening in people's homes. How is that affecting like people's abilities to like make choice or like know which direction? And then like, as if like none of us have ever made a mistake. And made mistakes that potentially could have gotten us in jail. We just didn't end up there, right? Like that's so real. And I wonder if I can ask you a little bit more of a more personal question here. Yes, good. Okay. So you work for one of the largest technology companies in the world.
Right.
What did you do to kind of overcome the various obstacles that you were facing to get a job at Microsoft? And how's it going today? Well,
I'm so glad you asked. I love sharing the story. So I had to fight like hell for my job. I I applied for the job, and because of Ban the Box, they don't allow you to ask if you have if you've ever had a criminal conviction. And so I was able to get in for the interview. But the way they get you is, so what they do is they push that rejection process from the beginning and they push it to the end. It's almost worse at the end, because then you get the offer and then you're so excited, and then you have to do the background check. And then that's when they rescind your job offer, once the felony conviction shows up. So what ended up happening is I went in for the interview. She hired me right on the spot. And I came clean with her, because I said, well, I'm so excited you've offered me this job. I have to tell you something. I just got out of prison like 3 months ago. It was for, drugs. It's not who I am today, but I'm, will this hinder me from moving forward? Because she had mentioned that the job was, contingent upon the background check, whether I could move forward or not. So I wanted to put it out there so that she knew. And basically what she told me was, well, I'm not the one that makes the decisions. Some basically third-party company that runs the background check gives it a yes or no, and then sends it back to HR. And then HR is like, oh, it's flagged no. And that's how the process works. So but typically what they do, they have to go through a process. So my background check got flagged, and what they did was they emailed me and said, hey, your background check was flagged. You have, I think it was like 3 to 5 days to respond and explain why you have this conviction. And so for me, I was like, ooh, this is my opportunity to, share my story, talk a little bit, about what I had done wrong, but more importantly, what I had done right. And I had done so many rehabilitative programs, because after my arrest, and especially like finding out I was pregnant right after my arrest, I was determined to turn my life around. I didn't want to be the same type of parent my father was to me, to my own child. So I took a bunch of rehabilitative programs and classes. I got myself into treatment while I was out fighting my case. I continued on that path when I went to prison. And so I had a stack of rehabilitative certificates, everything from anger management, forgiveness, another like 2 drug treatment programs, a healing class, how to heal your childhood traumas. It's just all kinds of, various classes. And so I had all of these certificates. And so when I wrote my letter explaining my conviction, I scanned all of those certificates to my cloud drive, and I attached them to that email and I sent it off. And I really thought that they would see a different side and that they would give me a chance, because here I was saying, hey, look, I'm rehabilitated and you don't believe me, here's the proof. But unfortunately, they came back and said, no, we're not going to move forward. And, what's interesting is, I'm going to back it up a little bit. Before the background check came back, I was doing the onboarding process. And I actually, which ironic, is they sent me some information about this special ordinance in San Francisco called the Fair Chance Ordinance. I'd never heard of it before. You guys heard of it? Oh, it's amazing. Maybe someone can drop it in the chat. But anyway, so this Fair Chance Ordinance is a special law in San Francisco that helps people with criminal records from being discriminated against. So what it states is that no company in San Francisco can discriminate against your criminal conviction unless it directly relates. So for example, if you robbed a bank, Wells Fargo has reason to not hire you. The other thing it states is that if the person has proof of rehabilitation, which I had, then no company can discriminate against you because you rehabilitated yourself. So when I read this, I became very, very hopeful. And I thought, wow, they're going to hire me. And so when they said, nope, we're not hiring you, I was just like, what? Wait a minute. You guys sent me this information. Obviously, you must know about it. And They didn't know. Because think about it. So Microsoft's headquarters is in Redmond, right? And I think it would be rather difficult to know of every city's, if they have special laws. And so nobody had ever stood up to Microsoft. Nobody, and I'm sure there's been a ton of people with criminal records that have been discriminated before I came along, but nobody stood up. And so I decided I was going to. I honestly didn't know if the Fair Chance Ordinance could help me, but I wasn't gonna not try, because if I didn't fight, I would always be left with what if for the rest of my life. And I didn't want that. So I contacted the Fair Chance Ordinance, and she asked me what company had discriminated against me. And when I told her, she told me that she didn't think we could win, that she had never fought a company that big, but that she would fight for me. So I said, let's go, let's do it. So I went toe to toe with Microsoft, and they came back and they said, well, she hasn't been out of prison long enough, and she could relapse, and she could, go back to prison. And what if she steals? Just all the basic things that, a lot of companies, have concerns about. And, our argument was, well, these laws are in place. Just because you're Microsoft doesn't mean you don't have to, abide by these laws. There will be, repercussions if you don't. And, this girl has worked hard to turn her life around, and we're here to protect people like her. And so after Microsoft realized that this was indeed a law, they said, okay, we're going to give you another chance. Now I could keep going because there's some other struggles I had, but let me get to the good part. So the good part of it is, so I've been at Microsoft now for 5 years. So when I first started, they didn't want to hire me. They definitely did not want to hire me. There was this one particular HR rep that would check in on me every month just to see how I was doing, expecting me to be doing, terrible. And every time she called my manager, it was always a praise report. And so within the first 2 months, I was voted MVP by all of my peers in management. Within 6 months, I got my first promotion. Yeah, I beat out 7 other applicants, 3 of which had been there, for years waiting for this promotion. Needless to say, they weren't very excited about me getting it, but I was. Well, then they need to step up their game, right? And then a year and a half later, I got another promotion into corporate. And so that really was my goal when I first started was, get my foot in the door in the retail level and then work my way up into corporate and have my dream job doing, sales or something. I just wanted to get into corporate so bad. And so I've been in corporate now for 3 years, 3.5 years. And I found out not too long ago that I am one of their top sales reps for Microsoft Surface devices. I'm the number one rep. Yeah, I'm the number one rep in the West. And I am in the top 10 in the entire United States. And my manager told me that because of my quota attainment and because of my performance, I am now going to be nominated for Platinum Club, which is the highest achievement you can get at Microsoft. It's like, so think about it. So there's 150,000 employees, less than 1% get picked or even nominated for this. And here I am, I'll be the first formerly incarcerated to get nominated for this. But I'm super, super proud of myself. I knew that, being the first formerly incarcerated that Microsoft would hire, I knew there was a big weight on my shoulder. I knew I was going to be the trailblazer. But that didn't matter to me. I mean, I was just so grateful for my second chance that every day I came to work, I just had this attitude of gratitude and this passion to excel. And I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, I think, too, to prove everyone wrong. So yeah, so I know that's a long story, but yeah, things are going great. And Microsoft has completely changed their tune. They have embraced me. They are so supportive of me. They even let PBS do a story on me and my journey into Microsoft. And now they've given me the opportunity. Before, when I would ask to use their name in presentations or things like this, there was always no, we can't let you do that. But now they've given me free reign to use their name, and they're very proud of me, and they voiced this to me. So it's really cool.
I mean, Shelley, first of all, you just really lit the whole place on fire. So please know that. And I would literally stand up and cheer, like give you applause, except then everyone would know that I just have PJs on my bottom. Real talk. Art, were you going to add something in there?
I just wanted to say, Shelley, you rock. You are absolutely amazing. The chat is blowing up, but I just had to say as a panelist that it is definitely an honor to sit on a panel with you and to hear your story. That is absolutely incredible, insane. And I take my hat off to you. Absolutely amazing.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And what else, what also is great is, Microsoft is joined the Fair Chance Business Coalition. So they made a pledge now to hire folks with criminal records.
That is awesome. The thing that always continues to like make my head want to be that blow up emoji is like, Shelley, to your point, like that you were the first. Like, how are we still having so many firsts? Right? Like when we talk about these different dimensions and it's like, oh, we're so excited. First, and you're like, first, you know how much brilliance we're missing out on? Yeah. And so I really, in addition to having just such like gratitude for you for like being open and sharing and communicating with us, I think one of the things that's always important is like, these things have to be a part of our why we do this, why we're engaged. Because I know, like, if I go for an interview, I am like nervous and on pins and needles. Am I going to get a call back? And I think about like, you only named like 16 hoops you had to jump through after that, right? And I'm sure there were more. And so like recognizing the barriers that are put in front of people that we don't even see, like that needs to be a part of our why. Sorry. But I know Rachel Porter had some things to chime in on and add some like different texture to this particular conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just still holding that story, Shelley. And, as a narrative change strategist and as a storyteller, I think you just illustrated so beautifully how stories can activate and can motivate us collectively and individually to make real shifts within the organizations we're working with, and whether as consultants or as employees. So I think that's just so important. And thinking about what are some of the barriers to making the world the place we want to live in, work, thrive in. For me, as a climate justice and Indigenous rights activist and someone who was born at the intersection of Native and settler relations, I think a lot about what are the stories of America. So I know we've got folks here from all over the world. And so please apply this to where you live. But what are the foundational stories of the land that you're living on? And in the US context, or Turtle Island, which is North America, Canada, the US, and Mexico, we've had stories of displacement, migration, genocide. The US was founded on stolen land. And one of the things that I see again and again in the DEI space, or really just, in any change-making space, even, corporations that have a social corporate responsibility branch or impact investing or whatever, it's kind of like, all right, we've got these problems right now. And the story of how we got there doesn't even come near the beginning of when it all started. So just putting it out there that, colonialism is a driver of climate change. Like where we got to today is because we have commodified land and think we can own it. And that actually started in Europe, from a moving of, communal pastoral living to buying and selling of land, which then translated to buying and selling people. And so this history matters. And when we think about how we shift these dynamics and these solutions and these power imbalances in really visceral, detail level, everyday decision making, if we're not thinking about the big picture and how we sit in it, we're gonna keep missing the real issue. And so we only have the ability to draw on our own lived experience, every single one of us. And every single one of us has a relationship with white supremacy, regardless of our background. And that's going to look very different based on our lived experiences, as it would, right? But we can all interrogate the effect that these oppressive structures have had on our lives. And we can use it to think about how we're going to act in situations based on our privilege or our power or our experience. That's individual work that has a real deep connection to the socio-political shifts that we're talking about and that the whole DEI field is trying to do. So I would say it's okay to think about the macro. It's okay to think about the historical because it is super relevant to the day-to-day. And so it's not a waste of time to take a step back. And I think that's the biggest barrier because we're all about profit margins, which means we don't have time to think about the big story, but that's where the solution is.
Okay. That, Rachel, I so value what you just asked. Just kidding. Technology is new to me. But just, I want to share that I recently discovered, I added a link in the chat there. I live in LA County, and there is actually the ability to pay rent to the indigenous folks here. And so I just found that, and I will start paying my monthly rent to the community whose land I am occupying. But I felt really excited about that's the way that feels good, is actually reinvesting, really recommitting, as well as learning about the community who was here before me and is still here, many of them. Art, I would love to hear your voice on this question too.
I actually am going to defer, I think, to Jessica to allow her to go ahead and share.
Oh my gosh, Art, thank you. That is so kind of you. Gosh, I'm learning so much just sitting here and listening with you all. And Rachel, what you just brought up about the history and the context to which we step into our work, and for the communities to which we're, advocating for a seat at the table, it really got me thinking of, the history of our neurodivergent community. And you're right, how key that is in starting the conversation. And so what I'll say there is, if anyone here knows somebody who's neurodivergent, who has autism, a family member, a neighbor, a friend, I think about the classroom, and I think about, what's fascinating about the work we're doing now is that the quote unquote generations have all had such different conditions and even treatments to which they went through schooling as somebody who is neurodivergent, where I feel like I am meeting 40 and 50-year-olds who never had a label. I mean, are diagnosed and now discovering, oh my gosh, this is what I have. This brings so much clarity to my life. I wish I had this when I was in school as a teenager, and wrestling with the challenges, the barriers that they're facing now at this later stage in their careers. And then I'm meeting, those that are millennials. I'm one of them, where I was in the classrooms and schools that still had a special needs classroom. and there are still special needs schools, and you need it for a wide spectrum of impact. But, I didn't grow up in a school that was integrated, a classroom that was integrated. I look at the generation now where you're starting to see integrated classrooms, and friends telling me that their kids are in school in a classroom with, 3 boys that are autistic. And I mean, it changes the entire dynamic of how we view the community, how we participate and learn with. And so I'm so glad you bring that up, because I think that kind of steps into then, like, what are the barriers that exist? And for our neurodivergent community, there are so many misperceptions. And one of the questions that might come up later, but I'm going to bring in here, is about, like, what was one of the biggest aha moments that I had to have, with this community, and misconceptions I had to overcome. I'm what they call a civilian to the autism neurodivergent community, where I'm not personally impacted or affected by it. I don't have a close family member. That's a whole other story of how I came into this work. But one of the most humbling experiences I had was going to an autism conference, and there were a panel of self-advocates ranging in age from teenagers up to like 40-year-old. And you could see on the panel, there were 2 young men in particular, one who he was very handsome, and just I was like, oh, my naivety of like, oh, I wonder what disability he has, like no concept of it whatsoever. And then somebody else who was in a wheelchair, had an aide with him, and what you would deem as more impacted, severely impacted. And they're asking the panel these questions. And I find out that both of them were nonverbal. And when they were using the reading device and pointing, and the interpreter was speaking the words at which they were writing, I was in tears, like so humbled, because I was one of those people that was in a grocery store or in a restaurant, saw someone in a wheelchair that's, pretty decked out, and you can tell that they're living. That is how they are mobile. And all of the misperceptions I had from an intelligence standpoint of their contributions, and the sentences and profoundness of the words they were saying, was just overwhelming. And so when I think about the barriers to our community, so much of it is this perception, one, how much we put emphasis on verbal communication skills as your determinant to being hired, to the determinant of the value you bring to our community. And so much of what we do is bringing universal design to the workplace. The interview process is the biggest barrier for our community, where an interview is sitting across the table, using my verbal communication skills to convince you why I'm the best candidate for this job. Well, for many in our community, this 80% unemployment rate we see, we believe is because for so many in our community, they're going to present differently. Their communication style, the pace in which they communicate can be very different. And this is the biggest aha moment we have with our HR recruiters and teams. So we design an interview process that's skills-based. Demonstrate and show me the skills that you have for this job. And we're not going to rely as much on your verbal communication skills. Of course, it's still important because we do work as teams and we communicate, but there's multiple formats of communication, email, chat, and not putting so much emphasis on it. And time again, when we run our hiring programs with companies, HR recruiters are just astounded, and they're like, one who recently said, Jessica, I've been doing recruiting for 15 years, and I have overlooked so many candidates because we put so much emphasis on verbal communication skills and cultural fit, and how much, I never received this training to even realize and recognize that if somebody takes a little longer to answer a question, that's okay. allowing pauses, not filling up these awkward silences, like giving people the space to think of a question to answer. And a pro tip to recruiters that I'm sharing with everyone is when you're asking an interview question through a virtual platform like this, type it into the chat. For some people, auditory processing, just hearing what I'm saying to give a response, that processing speed could be different. But seeing the words in the chat could help my processing to provide the right answer, or to even type it into the chat. And so there's so many, that is the biggest barrier for our community, is the interview process. And gosh, there's so much to say. And I would also say, bringing universal design to the workplace. We know in schools that students learn through multiple learning formats and using different modalities. And we need to bring that to the workplace. How do we build workplaces that capitalize on universal design and implement it just like we do with accessibility? And this is going to be good for everybody. And so I know we were talking about companies who've done this right. We worked with Gallagher Insurance, and they have a job role that they have really high turnover for. It's very repetitive, task-oriented, detail-oriented. And we said, this is a great job for our community. For some, not all, that are autistic, some of those cognitive differences allow for individuals to focus for longer periods of time, to feel comfortable in the routine, and that's what they like. And so we designed an interview process where candidates actually followed a job procedure to do the insurance policy processing. And the tool was so powerful that the manager said, Jessica, can we license this from you for the next year? We want to use this for all of our hires because this is equitable for everybody. And they just shared with me that they had a great interviewer who was so strong in verbal communication skills. She thought she would have hired her, had her do the skills-based assessment, and then realized, oh no, this is not a good fit. And would not have been able to see that without a tool that made that type of equity. And it's same for people who have accents. There's bias to that in communication. So many other components to it, but that is like the biggest. If I could send anything to HR recruiters, that's what I would say is so important. Move towards skills-based interviews because that is going to level the playing field for everybody. And training, what Shelley was sharing, these trainings that allow you to step into someone else's perspective, like a cross-cultural competency, is so important. What it means to actually show actions of psychological safety, and to be curious and to learn from somebody else's perspective and someone else's understanding of the world, how they see data, how they see information. Shelley, you mentioned about hiring in the government. Same with our community. The Departments of Defense in Israel and Australia, we recently heard about the CIA here in the US, solely hiring people with autism because they see topography of geographical data in a completely different way. Data pattern recognition. I mean, literally a diversity of minds to come to problem solving. And skills-based interviews will allow you to see some of those amazing gifts and perspectives. So I'm going to pause there. So much more to say.
I feel like we could have like an all evening conversation. I know I have interests for everybody. But one thing I hear you saying, Jessica, too, that like with that story that you shared about the conference that you went to, is sometimes the biggest barrier is our own assumptions, totally. Right? Yeah. Not just like some of the messages we've absorbed over the decades that have created different narratives, Rachel, but just that piece of like, sometimes it's our assumptions that are the barriers. I just want to, time is an elusive mini pants. And so, Sherry, I know that the questions have just been coming in, and I just want to ask you to come back and lead us through that.
Can I just, wow. I just feel like I'm sitting in front of like a council of elders. I'm learning so much. And if you've been in this journey with us and sat on our quarterly panels or listened to our quarterly panels, I just feel like our universe is just expanding and expanding and expanding. And I learned so much, and I just appreciate each and every one of you. Just absolutely amazing. The intersectionality too, just like there's so much to talk about. Okay, let me. I'm on the clock. What was I supposed to do? Oh, Q&A. Okay, looks like we have a couple of great questions that were submitted by the people participants. Lewis Brown Griggs, you're welcome to follow along with me in the Q&A yourselves. But Lewis Brown Griggs asks, how do each of you best challenge and attract white male managers and executives to experience their self-interest in modeling equity and inclusion and belonging? I think that's a great question, Lewis. And Casey, do also feel free to jump in on that and answer. But I'll just open that to anybody. Anybody have a good answer for that?
I can give a quick one. My co-founder is a white male, and I have a lot of white colleagues. And when I walk into a room or a conversation, almost always they look to my white colleagues, thinking they're the executive director. They're the ones calling the shots, making the business decisions. And what I have appreciated so much from my colleagues is they right away will see it and they'll say, oh, well, Jessica's leading the organization, so she's the best position to answer this question. I mean, that is so simple, but even for me, that has made the biggest difference. And to know that we're on the same team, that they see and recognize that, and they step in right away, time and time again. And I know that's one thing, but that makes all the difference, to stand up and to just say and acknowledge who is who, and those call out the dynamics immediately.
Isn't that amazing how we automatically make those assumptions? The tallest white man in the room.
Yes. And there's actually psychology to that. Just heads up, you can find this data elsewhere, but if you think of children to parents, you're always looking up at your superiors. That's how we have been raised. And when you look at the stats of CEOs in companies, the height is one of the percentage of men who are that tall is very small, but the number of CEOs that are that tall is very high. So there's a psychological piece to that.
Yes, that's really, I hadn't thought about looking up to adults. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And infuriating. Anyone else?
I would just add, I think it's about creating spaces that people can have dialogue in together. And it's a really tricky practice, because you have to do it in a way that both allows people to kind of become more onto themselves and build self-awareness and other awareness, and realize where they have privileges and opportunities that maybe others did not, and just really like ground themselves in that, while also protecting the marginalized folks and not having them be on the hook to teach, the white men, about different demographics that they represent or what their lived experiences or all of that kind of stuff. It's a delicate balance, and it's really challenging. I spend a lot of my time doing that. And I think that there's a lot of cool technologies that are coming out that help facilitate those kinds of conversations. And, of course, there's DEI consulting companies that do that more sort of 1.0 in terms of like having people from a marginalized identity hold focus groups or hold space for these kinds of things, where they're really very conscious and, intentional about space holding.
I love that. Thank you. Wow. I love it.
Sherry, can I just add something there? I think there's also it kind of depends, right? Am I in relationship with the person that I'm with at a meeting? Am I not in relationship with a person at the meeting? If I'm in relationship with the person in the meeting, I'm like, how you feeling today? What do you want my role to be? Right? Because sometimes it's like, I'm going to step in front and take some hits for them. Sometimes I'm going to be like, they're talking, right? I'm going to be side by side. And sometimes I'm just going to have their back, right? Of like, if somebody's pushing back, I'm going to be like, I just want to go back to what they were saying, right? Like, it's going to be really different depending on if I'm in a relationship or if I'm not. And if I'm not, I have a tendency to just kind of be like, something feels a little off to me. Right? Just like interrupting it, but then like almost calling other people in to chime in. Because if somebody wants to use their own voice to stand up for themselves, I don't want to do that for them. Right? But I do want to interrupt and then kind of create space. Right? And so I think it's nuanced. And I think you also have to figure out like, what's your authentic style in that too? If I, did what Rachel does, or if I did what Sherry does, I'd probably muck it up a lot more because I'm almost mimicking versus kind of figuring out like, what is this for me? And how do I want to be showing up?
I love that. Shelley, looks like would you like to answer?
As you guys were talking, it was just making me think of my friend Jason Ford. He's in the PBS show, but he was my committed ally. And although I'm not a person of color, I am a marginalized person. And he went to bat for me because, like I had mentioned before, I mean, there's other obstacles that I had to go through at Microsoft that I just didn't have time to discuss. But getting into corporate, even though I was already a Microsoft employee, was still another challenge because of my record. And they said, oh, well, retail is different than corporate. And so him being a white male and being a leader and an executive at Microsoft used that privilege, and he went to bat for me. And the easy thing would have been that he could have done is just said, you know what, it's just too much work. But he didn't. He took it he took it like 5 steps further. He called together a meeting with all of the decision makers that were not wanting me to move over to corporate. And he said, what is going on here? He says, we talk about being a diverse and inclusive company, and we talk about empowering others and every organization on this earth to achieve more. I mean, that's our mission statement. And he goes, how are we doing this by not giving this girl a second chance? And so he's the type of man that would do that for anybody, especially, a person of color, because he really does believe in DEI. And he knows that he has privilege, and he is just so grateful to be able to use that to help others. So, yeah.
That's a great story. Kudos to Jason Ford, wherever you are out there, Jason.
I know. I wish we would have brought him on this panel.
Well, I'll have to watch that. We're all watching the PBS special. We're going to pop some corn and watch it.
Yeah, he's a great speaker too, and he's very passionate about this. So I think, if you guys ever do another panel, let me know. We'll get him. I'll invite him.
Love it.
Sherry, can I jump in real quick?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I would just say to the question, I think it's really important in my experience and my role in D&I as the head of diversity and inclusion, that I also allow white male executives to not feel like they're alone. A lot of times in D&I, you have white male executives who can feel like they are the target of all things D&I. It's like they are always the bad guy when you're talking about gender equality, when you're talking about racial equality, racial justice, all of the things. And so what I've learned to do is I look at my role as being a ally for even them. So if I see a male executive in a meeting and they're talking over a female, I will say, hey, Jim, I don't know if you noticed Susan was talking, and so I'll kind of defer. Or if, like you saw me do earlier, I will say, hey, I defer if they present to me, I'll say, I defer my opportunity to so-and-so, so-and-so. And then I'll say, hey, Jim, would love to have a one-on-one with you after. And that's an opportunity to show Jim that, number one, you are there to support him, to make sure he is conscious of how he's coming across in meetings. And that people have a tendency of appreciating that, at least in my experience.
I think that's power. Go ahead. I'm sorry, cut you off.
No, I think that when we show that we are not there to villainize them, We are actually there to set them up for success and to help them be more inclusive. I've had people who were not fans of diversity and inclusion be my biggest allies. They're like, does Art need more money? Let's get Art find some money to give his department more money. Because I didn't villainize them, I made sure they felt like I was there available even for them. And that was just my little 2 cents.
I love that. I was hoping that you would jump in on that. Yeah, modeling it, creating that space. And I think that's really, having the power, but deferring that power is really more powerful than just, making assumptions and jumping right in. I love that. Okay. All right. Let's try to hit one more question, and then I want to turn it over to Danielle for the final wrap up. Let's see. Tanasha Lawcock says, how would you advise a leader on how best to have a conversation with an employee who may not feel psychologically safe? Who wants to take psychological safe?
Well, I spoke about it earlier. So, Rachel, you want to go?
Oh, yeah, sure. We can take turns. I'll just say briefly, I think it really depends on what the issue is, because there are situations where if things have escalated, I think the manager or a person in power is not the right person to have the conversation with the person feeling vulnerable, and creating a space where that power dynamic is a little bit mitigated, maybe what they need, because chances are if you're their boss, no matter your intentions, you're not going to be able to provide the support that someone needs when they're trying to keep their job and perform. But that said, I think there's usually a lot of moments before you get to a crisis point. And so in those moments, I really think modeling transparency and humility, in reference to the last question, one of the terms we didn't coin, but really like to use at Kneading Change is compassionate accountability. And compassionate accountability is mutual between a person in more power and also, the person who may be, in an employee position. And so holding yourself accountable as a leader can model to others that it's okay to be vulnerable and express a concern about the working environment before it escalates to a conflict point. But I also think in workplaces, it's really important that even beyond HR, maybe there's a place for your employees to seek support outside of work. And so a great example of this is Relovution is an organization creating compassionate workplaces. And right now, I know this because I'm working with them. They are consulting with an organization that has agreed to basically provide free coaching and consulting around burnout to their employees. And those employees just get to sign up confidentially as needed. And the company has outsourced a team of consultants and professionals to support them. And so that's an example of a pathway outside of HR where you can give your employees who may be feeling stressed, triggered, vulnerable, oppressed, maybe, and have a place to kind of get support first. Because when you're in that space, sometimes you need help and support before you can talk about, and this is how we could fix it or make it better, and you don't want to put that on someone who's feeling vulnerable. But I'm really interested to hear what Rachel has to say.
I love all that. So I won't repeat anything in different words that you already covered, but I will add two more things. One is, I think normalizing mental health days is good for all of us, but particularly if people are feeling not psychologically safe, and whether that's in your policy changes, whether that's in the CEO or people in very visible positions, saying, I'm taking a mental health day. Right. And making that okay in your culture. We live in such a grind culture, and, busy is revered as, I don't know, sexy, cool, important, whatever. Right. So I think that can be one thing. The other thing I'll share is this idea of an inclusion dial. So when you have a meeting, having a way for people to anonymously, meaning not connected with their identity, share, how are you feeling right now in this meeting? And you can do it at the beginning, you can do it at the end, you can come up with your own words for it. But it's something like, I'm feeling cherished, which would be sort of like the best case scenario, welcomed, valued, seen, heard. You kind of have whatever your dial is, you can make up your own words that fit with your culture, or none of the above. Mm-hmm. And what it does is it flips the script and puts it back on the people who are in charge of the meeting or in charge of the team or the project or whatever it is. It's up to them to figure out how to improve that, right? To make more people feeling more on the cherished end of things than not. And it protects the identity of the people who are feeling some kind of way about not feeling seen, not feeling heard, not feeling included. So.
Love that, both of you. Just amazing. I feel like we're like destigmatizing so many things. Destigmatizing mental health is a big one. I love that. Anyone else want to jump in? Casey, I see your mouth moving, but okay, you're just talking to yourself with your mouth. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Whew, that's so amazing. It's so amazing. Gosh, I just feel like I got an MBA, like the miniest MBA, mini MBA. Wonderful. All right, Miss Danielle. I think it's time to, not unfortunately, go to you, but unfortunately we have to wrap up this amazing panel. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the slides and share my screen and then let you talk through them. If that
Sure. I just wanted to first say thank you, everybody, for sticking around and being here, and especially to our moderator and our panelists. My only regret is that we didn't make this 2.5 hours because there was so much. There's so much wisdom in this group, and I just really wanted to hear you guys talk longer and longer and longer, or hear you all, talk longer. So I appreciate those of you that stuck around, and I'm sorry that we didn't get to all of the questions that we had planned, but I will say to everybody we recorded today's panel discussion. I'm going to send the recording along with the lively chat log by Friday. I'm also going to include in the chat log, there is resources that we link to, but I'm going to try to pull out some that we didn't get to that our panelists so graciously shared with me ahead of time, because they're amazing. So anyways, on that note, just real quickly, I wanted to share a couple updates on the life of D&I here at CEE. Just wanted to let you all know, thank you. We heard you and appreciate the great feedback we received from this community in our last D&I survey. And as a result of that feedback, we learned that many of you still want to join a cohort that's going through an executive certificate D&I training program. So we do have 4 open seats available for one of our active cohorts, which is about to begin the intermediate level of the program, facilitated by the uber talented Tonnelly. So if you're interested, I'm going to go ahead and share the link right now in the chat. And that's a place where you can register. And feel free to reach out to me if you have any other questions about that. Secondly, we also heard that many of you are looking for a kind of a summer school version of the certificate program. And if you're interested in receiving more information about a 3-month format that you can complete this summer, please put your email in the chat right now, and we can reach out to you in the coming week with all the details that we have for that. Again, this is a 3-month summer program. Sounds like Casey is confirmed to lead one of our cohorts, which we're really excited about. So please, if you're interested, just to receive more information, not to make a commitment, drop your email in there for me. And third, we, in addition to the D&I training, there seems to be a growing interest in having leadership training topics available at your own convenience in more of a consumable, cost-effective way. So grounded in neuroscience, which is something that we talk a lot about at CEE, we have this newly launched learning platform that we've teamed up with Blue Ocean Brain to serve up some critical material on the go in a way that fits easily into the natural flow of your workday. So I'm going to go ahead and post a link to learn more about the micro-learning offerings we have as well. And thank you for letting me speed through these real fast. And last but not least, our next webinar is July 27th of this D&I series. And this one, we're going to be talking about the biases, recognizing the biases within our systems. So we're going to announce the panelists soon. We're working on actually putting together another amazing panel. So actually, if you're interested in just registering and saving your seat, so to speak, I'm going to go ahead and just put the link in there right now. We have a Zoom registration link already set up, so you can just put in your info and we'll get you the details of our panelists soon. So with that, I just want to say again, thank you to our amazing community here, to our panelists, and thank you everyone for your feedback. I apologize about the technical difficulties we had earlier. We hope to have the closed captioning up and running for you next time. But with that, have a great night, morning, or afternoon, wherever you find yourself, and thank you for being here.